Now that the regular season is done, it feels appropriate to give you an updated 2025 NFL mock draft. For this one, I went through the second round until we got to the Bears, 2 second-round picks, and then I stopped. Forgive me, but these things take time. I actually try to think about them, play out different scenarios. So as we go through the next several months, when I do updated mock drafts, sometimes it'll only be 1 round, sometimes it'll be 2, sometimes it'll probably even be 3 rounds. It just depends on where I'm at and how much time I have available. But before we get into the picks, which will be in the description box below, just a couple of things that stand out to me first. Number one, what an epic bag fumble by the Patriots on Sunday. That was pretty epic. You were basically in the driver's seat for the number 1 overall pick. And you could say, well, they already have Drake May. They've got Joe Milton as the backup. Like, why would that number 1 pick matter? It matters because it gives you options and you have leverage, because you could sit there and basically sell the top pick to the highest bidder, whether that's somebody like the Giants, somebody like the Raiders, somebody like the Saints, who knows, right? And for the Patriots to go from driver's seat to the top pick to winning a meaningless game, and it was meaningless, because they barely even played Drake May. Gerard Mayo ends up being fired. Like, what an epic bag fumble that was. You could say something similar about the Giants winning the week before, costing them a chance at the number 1 overall pick. That's a pretty big bag fumble too. And look, I understand what you're going to say of you can't really tell players and coaches to tank. 100% agree. 100%. However, you can, as a fan, remove that thought process and look at the bigger picture and realize how bad of an outcome that is organizationally and in terms of the big picture. It is. Now, with that said, the Tennessee Titans came through and they hold the number 1 overall pick. So the Tennessee Titans are officially on the clock, and for all intents and purposes, we have to believe that they are thinking about which quarterback it's going to be, Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders. With that said, it is notable that more often than not, far more often than not, the number 1 pick in the draft does not end up being the best player from that draft class. More often than not, the quarterback drafted number 1 overall does not end up being the top quarterback in their draft class. So for those that might be like, oh my God, take stock in that, right? And look at like the Bears beating the Packers, and it's, they could have had pick 7 or 8, and instead they have pick 10. And does it really matter? It could be yes or no. Great players can be found all throughout the draft. It's about how do you find them, right? So to sit there automatically and say they're at 10 when they could have been a little bit higher, that was a meaningless win, and maybe, but maybe not, right? So you have to ultimately see how the draft plays out. So anyways, let's talk about what I've got playing out here. And first thing you'll notice is I've got Tennessee not going Shedeur, and I've got them going Cameron Ward, the quarterback from Miami. I don't know, man. I'm going to start here in the next week or two really studying the quarterbacks and starting to go through the prospects for this year's draft. Consider me not incredibly impressed as of right now with Shedeur. Like, what does he do that is so elite that would justify him being a top pick in the draft? And it could be that I just haven't watched closely enough to be able to see it. And I'm not talking about the results. Like, I talk about a lot. When it comes to the draft, you have to be careful when you're looking at prospects, you're evaluating their NFL potential. You're looking at process way more than you are results. Results are nice, but it's about process. It's about skills. It's about translatable, projectable skills. And I see Shedeur, he's not particularly big. He's not super athletic or mobile, and it certainly doesn't manifest in his play. His arm strength is certainly not on any level elite. Like, what are those special traits and characteristics that you could hang your hat on to say that he's a top pick? It's a fair question, right? And it feels like this is a draft class where you have a couple more teams that are quarterback desperate than there are legit quarterbacks worth taking that high. Just saying. So, yeah, I've got Tennessee taking Cameron Ward. And then you get to Cleveland. And you have to expect that they might be quarterback driven. is Deshaun Watson sucks, even though they're still on the hook for a ton of dead cap with him. You know, it sounds like he had a setback in his Achilles, and even if he didn't, he sucks anyways. So in this mock draft, yes, I had him going with Travis Hunter, say, let's get an athlete over there. Excuse me. But the reality is Cleveland certainly has to be considering quarterback here, as do the Giants, right? And especially if they kept Brian Dable and Joe Shane, like, why would you do that if you weren't going to end up with a quarterback? Now, I've got him taking Shedeur at 3. I think Shedeur is the better fit for them and what they want to do. I would assume him and Dion would rather see Shedeur in that New York market. That's just a thought. But that's where I'm coming from on this. Now, once you get away from kind of like those top 3 picks, and, you know, for Cleveland, if they don't go quarterback, then you go with Travis Hunter, and you're saying, okay, you're either getting what you feel like is going to be an elite wide receiver or an elite corner. Which one you're going to make them is kind of dependent upon you. For the Patriots, like, obviously the offensive line is a big deal there, but yeah, I don't know at pick 4 that the talent justifies the selection, right? Versus somebody like an Abdul Carter. Like, the Patriots suck all around. And they've got like $130 million in cap space, so they should be able to address that offensive line, especially the interior, through free agency. You got to get talent. I am totally on board with, you know, build around your quarterback first. That's the priority, yes. But that comes with some caveats. And one of those caveats is don't take a vastly inferior player at a position of need. You can't do that. If they're close, then you take the player at the bigger position of need that aligns with kind of like your organizational philosophy of build around Drake fucking May. But at this point, I look at Abdul Carter and I say, that gives them an elite edge rusher, somebody to build their defense around. You've got a shit ton of cap space. Like, go best player available at this point. Kind of similar with the Jags as well. You know, is where do they go there? Feels a little high to take an offensive lineman. Carter off the board. Maybe they would think about a Mason Graham. But I could say, hey, really need a stud in their secondary. Maybe Will Johnson would be that for them. Some of you might look at the Raiders and say, well, who's going to throw the ball to McMillan and Bowers? And it's a great question, right? You know, would they be a team that I could see going full bore after a Sam Darnold in free agency? Absolutely. Would that be a logical potential outcome for both parties? Probably. So there's that, right? But McMillan, you know, you get you a number 1 wide receiver to pair with Bowers, and all of a sudden you've got a better situation for any type of quarterback, whether young or experienced, to come into the fold. Jalen Walker, he's an interesting evaluation for me because he's about 245 pounds. He's got some great edge rush ability, some great blitz ability, but he's been deployed a lot as a linebacker. And he's one of those types of guys that I could see somebody in the top 10 saying to themselves, he is such a special athlete, we will figure out where to play them. And if you get it right, you might have a multiple-time All-Pro, multiple-time Pro Bowler. But if not, he might flame out very quickly, right? Think about like an Isaiah Simmons, something like that. But man, he's going to have some intriguing upside to teams, and I'd be stunned at this moment at least if he's not a top 10 pick. Especially if they think they could project him as like a 3-4 edge rusher or even a 4-3 defensive end, or type of system that you run where you have your 4-3 outside backers blitz a lot, would be a great fit for him. And Carolina would be doing backflips for Mason Graham at 8, because that defense sucks and they need help there. And then you start getting into where I think you would see more of the offensive linemen go off the board, and I will talk about the Bears here. You know, Josh Simmons at 10, I think I had him at 9 in the last mock draft. Yes, there's a concern when it comes to the injury, but when I look at this draft class and you look at guys that you project as being like, hey, they could be high-end, high-level left tackles at the next level, Josh Simmons certainly feels like that. And if you're saying, well, look, Braxton Jones, I mean, what the fuck are we talking about here? Braxton Jones, really? No. He stinks. Well, but PFF says, tell me how PFF grades these players. You can't, because they don't disclose their scoring methods. Therefore, their scoring methods are not repeatable. Therefore, you could certainly argue their scoring methods are fucking invalid. If I told you that I put in a whole bunch of mathematical work and came up with a score that said Braxton Jones was overall grade of 60 or an overall grade of 80, what the fuck's the difference? And seriously, what the fuck's the difference? Oh, do you got Chris Conerly with you voted? Other people who got no. What the fuck's the fundamental difference? There is none. So stop putting too much stock. It's a nice point of reference. I'm not trying to totally dismiss the work. I know those guys put a lot of work into it. But too many fans put too much stock into shit that they can't test and verify themselves. That's stupid. It's just like so many fans talk about, oh, EPA and all this other bullshit. We got to a funky-ass place in sports where too many people are basing their opinions and evaluations off of metrics they don't even know how to fucking calculate. Like, how stupid is that? And really, it's stupid. You don't even understand the outcome or metric that you're citing. Then it's probably not a good metric for you to use, I'm just saying. But Josh Simmons, look, bottom line at the end of the day, protecting Caleb Williams is still the priority. The Bears have quite a bit of money available in free agency. They can address the interior of the offensive line in free agency. And look, you're not going to be able to address the offensive line exclusively in the draft. That's just not realistic, right? So here's a chance to get you a high-end upside prospect that you compare with Darnell Wright. And if you think Josh Simmons is going to be an elite left tackle, then you've also got a good kind of staggering there with Darnell Wright will be entering year 3. Josh Simmons will only be a rookie. So you'll have a couple years in between, potentially having to give your bookend tackles big money offensive tackle contracts. It's a smart way to do it. Other things that stand out to me, really good talent in terms of this edge rush class. Some of you might be looking at saying, wow, you keep moving Mike Green up the board. You've got him at 20 at Tampa. Highly productive, highly explosive and athletic edge rusher from Marshall. I wouldn't be surprised if he works up into the first half of the first round, maybe similar to somebody like a Will McDonald from a couple of years ago. Those traits matter, man. Traits and highly productive, even if it's at a slightly lower level when you talk about Marshall, hard to see him not moving up the board. Malaki Starks, the safety from Georgia, I kind of struggle with him a little bit because he feels like a situation maybe of a Derwin James a few years ago where you just feel like he's going to be a damn good pro and an elite level pro if he's healthy, but teams are going to focus too much on like situational value and this and that, and it's going to lead to him dropping down the board and somebody getting tremendous value for taking him there. And this is where I'm like, sometimes we worry too much about shit like positional value and so forth, which brings me to the Ashton Jeanty conversation. Somebody's going to take him in the top half of round 1. And frankly, somebody should. I understand all the points around, well, don't take a running back in round 1 because of this reason and that reason. And the reality is, you then look at a team like the Detroit Lions, who took Jahmyr Gibbs 12th overall. I think they're pretty happy with that. If you take the right guy and it works, then it doesn't really matter, and you worry about the second contract shit later. And frankly, you've seen this year with guys like Derrick Henry going to the Ravens and Josh Jacobs to the Packers and obviously Saquon to the Eagles. Like, these big money backs still could have an outsized value to their team and their offenses. So, I'd be more concerned about a guy of Ashton Jeanty's size profile taking him in the top half of round 1, but I'd be stunned if he didn't go there, and Dallas would feel like a perfect spot. I would expect at any point in time between somewhere like New Orleans through Arizona, so somewhere between 9 through 16, most of those teams could talk themselves, not all, but most of them could talk themselves into taking Ashton Jeanty, and I fully expect one of them will. In terms of, last thing I'll call out here, in terms of the Bears' second round picks, addressing edge rusher, it's a thing of, especially if we project somebody like a Ben Johnson being the next head coach, he's going to want a David Montgomery type of physical back, and if you assume DeAndre Swift's back, he's not going to have him in the featured back role. Somebody like a Caleb Johnson sure feels a hell of a lot of appealing there. And, I could have said, hey, cut Tremaine Edmonds and address linebacker in round 2. But if you came away from this draft with a high-end left tackle, a running back 1 in round 2, and an edge rusher that provides a great complement to Montez Sweat and perhaps ends up being better than Montez Sweat, I would say that's pretty good work for the Bears in the beginning part of the draft. No way in fuck that happens, but it's nice to dream about. But instead, they kept Ryan Poles because Twinkies, who knows.